Hi, I'm Father Rick Morley, Rector of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and this is With Us, a course on the Tabernacle in the wilderness, the Temple in Jerusalem, and the presence of God with us. This is session 2, where we will begin to introduce the tabernacle. There's a fundamental shift that we're going to need to make as we consider the tabernacle and the temple. Because most of us have lived our whole lives associated with churches and church buildings. And the tabernacle and the temple are completely different entities. Some of us have traveled from church to church as we've traveled from place to place in the course of our lives. There might be the church of our childhood, the church of our college years, the church of our adulthood, maybe even the church that we retired to. There might be the church that we used to attend but don't anymore. And then there's the churches that we go to see when we travel. Grand cathedrals and abbeys and monasteries, chapels which inspire with their simplicity and their austerity. These buildings and collections of people in them will hold all sorts of feelings and emotions for us, some good and perhaps some not so good. Some churches are simple and small. Some are ornate and grand. Some just feel like they are soaked in God's presence all the time. And others may feel cold to us for some reason. But for most of us, churches are buildings in which the primary occupant is us. If we have a big congregation, then we build a big church. If we have a small congregation, we build a small church. We fill our churches with chairs or pews for the people to sit in. We make sure that there are, functioning bathrooms and exits which are clearly marked, and even kitchens and halls and sitting rooms for people to relax, learn, and celebrate in. But in the ancient world, temples were something else entirely. Their main occupant wasn't the people. Their main occupant was the God for whom the temple was erected to honor. Temples were houses for the divine. In Hebrew, the word most typically used to refer to the tabernacle is mishkan, which literally means dwelling place. Not the meeting place where the people meet, but the place where God dwells. Mishkan is a word that is related to another Hebrew word, shekinah, which referred to the glory of God that accompanies God's imminent presence, oftentimes manifesting itself as a cloud or smoke. The word for temple is bayit, which literally means house. The house of God. In the tabernacle in the wilderness and in the temple in Jerusalem, there were no chairs or pews for people to sit in for worship services. There weren't any pulpits or podiums for clergy to preach sermons from, no choir lofts, no sound systems. They were not designed in the least bit to accommodate groups of people coming for a service. Because the tabernacle and the temple were designed as the dwelling place of God. The tabernacle served Israel for those 40 years that they were wandering in the wilderness after they left Egypt, but before they crossed over into the Promised Land. For those 4 decades, it was the mobile shrine, capable of being set up, broken down, moved, and then set up again, and again, and again. Once they came into their own land, they stopped setting up the tabernacle. It was centuries before King Solomon would erect the temple in Jerusalem. When he did so, nearly every detail was modeled on the tabernacle. It was a larger building, and it was a building in that it wasn't portable, but all of the basic parts of the tabernacle had a parallel in the temple. First, though, we're going to take a look at the tabernacle, and then in a few sessions, we'll begin talking about the temple. The last half of the book of Exodus is dedicated solely to God telling Moses exactly what the tabernacle in the wilderness would look like, what each piece of it would be made of, and how it was all supposed to fit together. God drew Moses up to the summit of Mount Sinai to give him the 10 Commandments, but then to also give these instructions for the tabernacle and how the priesthood was to function within this tabernacle. The instructions for the construction of the tabernacle are incredibly detailed. When something is made of wood, Moses is told exactly what kind of wood it was to be made of. The measurements of everything were given in precise detail. The tabernacle was the dwelling place of God, but as I said before, it was also a mobile dwelling place. It was designed to be broken down, carried around, and then set up again. The basic layout of the tabernacle is a rectangular fence made of tent poles and cloth. In the middle of the court that this fence enclosed was a tent-like structure, which was divided into 2 rooms. The outer courtyard of the tabernacle was enclosed by a 7.5-foot high fence made of a linen curtain that was supported by fence posts that were 7.5 feet apart from each other. So the whole thing was 7.5 feet squares laid end to end. Remember the squares. We're going to see squares over and over again. The courtyard was 150 feet long and 75 feet wide, which, to give you some perspective, is far smaller than even a soccer field. Just to show you the level of detail that God gave Moses to build this tabernacle, the wooden posts were to be set on bronze bases with hooks of silver to support the linen curtain. The wooden posts were then held with support lines held fast by bronze tent pegs. On the east side of the enclosure was an entrance 30 feet wide with a curtain covering the entrance that was embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet yarns. This is where the people entered and exited this whole structure. In the courtyard was a large wash basin made of bronze. The priests used this wash basin to wash their hands before they could enter the tent or make a sacrifice. They also used the basin to wash up after carrying through with these sacrifices because they were bloody. In Exodus 38:8, there's an interesting detail given that the bronze for the basin was donated by the women of Israel, who gave their mirrors for this cause. In those days, mirrors were typically made of polished bronze, and so the basin used by the priests was the gift of the women of Israel. I think that's pretty cool. In the courtyard was also the altar of burnt offering, 7.5 feet wide on each side and 4.5 feet high. Whatever you think of when you think of altar, this isn't it. When I think of an altar, I think of a solid wood or stone piece of furniture that sacred items are laid on top of. That's not what this altar was. It was constructed like a giant charcoal grill with 4 walls made of unhewn stones surrounding a pit for burning wood and with a grate on top of it, upon which the parts of the animal to be burned would be placed. Every sacrifice that was made for the people and nation of Israel was burned on this altar. Some sacrifices required the burning of the entire sacrificed animal, and others required the burning of only certain parts of the animal, and the rest of it were eaten. But everything that was burned was turned into smoke on this grate. The Old Testament frequently states that the aroma of the cooking meat was pleasing to the Lord. So the two major pieces of furniture in the courtyard were the altar and the basin. The altar has this functional purpose, but fashioned out of unhewn stones, it symbolized the earth, and particularly the land of the earth. The bronze basin is sometimes referred to in the scriptures as the sea, and it obviously symbolized the oceans, seas, and lakes of the earth. Thus, this outer courtyard was emblematic of our world, the land and the sea. All Israelites were able to enter this courtyard. Notice that the precious metals that are used in the courtyard are almost exclusively bronze, with a little silver in the hooks holding up the linen boundary. The more precious metals will be saved for the inside of the tent. The tent in the middle of this courtyard is 45 feet long and 15 feet wide and 15 feet high. The tent is divided into two rooms. This first room, the outer sanctum, or the holy place, was 30 feet by 15 feet. The second room, the inner sanctum, or the Holy of Holies, was 15 by 15 by 15, a perfect cube. The interior of the first room, the larger outer sanctum, was covered on the inside with finely twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn with cherubim woven into them. Both the linen cloth and the dyes to make these colors would have been incredibly expensive. This wasn't just some tent. Remember, this is the house of God. These sheets of embroidered linen were affixed to the tent poles with clasps made of gold. Remember, while the bronze was given by the women from their mirrors, the gold and the silver was literally plundered from the Egyptians. In Exodus 3, God instructs Moses to tell the women to ask for gold and silver from their Egyptian captors. When they left Egypt, they took the precious metals with them. It was this plundered gold and silver that would have been used by the Israelites in the tabernacle. Another kind of interesting detail. The holy place and the Holy of Holies were divided by a curtain or veil made of linen and embroidered with cherubim. The exterior of the tent was first made of a covering of goat hair, with another covering of ram skins which had been dyed red. This exterior is probably not much different from what the rest of the tents in the camp of Israel were made of. But then there was another final layer of covering. Of what? It's kind of hard to say. The word here is almost impossible to translate precisely. Sometimes it's translated as durable leather, or porpoise skins, or manatee skins, or badger skins. Whatever it was something special and was meant to evoke the special nature of this tabernacle, especially what was inside of this tent, which we'll get to in the next episode. But now, here are some questions to ponder. What does it mean for God to want to dwell in our midst? Why do you think God was so specific about the details of the construction of the temple? And a question we'll come back to time and time again. What might it mean to craft a space in our world to experience God's presence among us today.